Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. May the peace and blessings and mercy of God be upon all of you. Thank you so much for having me here. I want to thank especially my fellow panelists, especially Mark, for making sure that for the first time I am not the one with the longest hair on a panel. It's never happened before, and I'm grateful. And I also would like to welcome all of you and thank all of you for being here today in such large numbers. And I think this is a really exciting time for us, and this is going to be a wonderful chance for us to dialogue with one another. And I'm going to keep my comments as short as possible so that we do have an opportunity to exchange thoughts. But I'd like to welcome all of you, both our Muslim brothers and sisters and the media and friends who are here, any members of Homeland Security that may be out there. And thank you all for coming. Our president has told us that we are engaged in a war of ideology, and he's absolutely correct. The problem is that a war of ideology cannot be defeated solely with bombs and guns. On the contrary, a war of ideology, any method to defeat an ideology of bigotry and fanaticism and hatred and exclusivism and militant puritanism, the only way to defeat such an ideology is with an ideology of tolerance and love and pluralism and peace. And the only people who are qualified to create that ideology are Muslims. Now, on the one hand, I think that is an exciting and wonderful and beautiful thing because it puts an enormous amount of responsibility in our hands, and it gives us an opportunity to make our voices heard in a way that they have never been heard. On the other hand, it's a lot of pressure, and quite frankly, who wants it? Who needs it? I mean, I could understand why so many of us, the 1.2 billion Muslims around the world who are minding their own business, living their own lives, going to mosque, trying to raise their children in the right way, trying to reconcile their values with the realities of the modern world, and would quite frankly not want to be a part of a war of ideology. And that's understandable. The reason I think that American Muslim community has really no way of avoiding this kind of responsibility is that we have something that our brothers and sisters throughout the Arab and Muslim worlds do not have, and that is a voice and an opportunity to make sure that that voice gets injected in the public dialogue about not just domestic policy, but foreign policy. And that is what's so astounding and miraculous about the country that we live in. And so we have a responsibility to make sure that the voice of the American Muslim community is a part of the dialogue about not just where this country is going domestically, and we've heard enough about that, and we will hear more about that, about how important it is to recognize that American values are Muslim values, and that we have a very large and very powerful role to play in the future, the future makeup of this wonderful country. But also, I think more importantly right now, we have a responsibility to make sure that our voice is injected in the issues of foreign policy, which are so important, and particularly with regard to public diplomacy. This, I think, is a very important thing, and I would very, very much like to thank Deputy Assistant Secretary Romanowski for sharing with us the vision of the State Department in trying to make American public diplomacy to the Muslim world such a priority, and it is an incredible priority. The only problem, I think, with that is that if our American foreign policy, if our public diplomacy program has as its primary goal the idea of making American foreign policy more palatable to the people of the Muslim world, then it is a waste of time. It is bound to fail from the start. That is not a criticism about American foreign policy, but it's the reality of how American foreign policy is seen in large parts of the Arab and Muslim worlds. If, on the other hand, the role of American public diplomacy is to communicate American values, American traditions, American morals, what it means to be American, then that is a public diplomacy that has a wonderful chance of making a real change in the world. But here is the issue. Who better to define, to communicate to the Muslim world what it means to be American than American Muslims? It is our responsibility because we, in who we are, in our very identities, we are the embodiment of the reconciliation, the merging of American and Muslim values. And as such, we are living examples of this. And we have to make sure that our identities, our needs, our desires are being met. We have to, like in any democracy, demand that those needs and desires and those values are being met. I mean, it is very important, and I congratulate the work that Karen Hughes has been doing so far, and particularly with regard to the listening tour that she has been on. But of course, to truly listen to a people, you have to be able to speak their language. You have to be able to know how to understand what it is that they are saying, what it is that they are struggling with. And I think that we need a much larger role for American Muslims as advisory councils, as ambassadorial councils, with making sure that this voice of America is, to the Muslim world, is a voice that is being primarily shaped by American Muslims. The other issue, I think, with regard to the role of American Muslims in U.S.-Muslim world relations, of course, is our foreign policy. Now, we can talk all day, of course, about our different views with regard to our foreign policy, and of course it would be impossible to talk about this subject without bringing up Iraq. This will probably get me into some trouble, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it anyway. We can talk on and on and on about whether the war in Iraq was just or unjust, whether it has been handled ineptly or not, whether we have created a situation in which we are now less secure than we were before, whether today's Iraq is better than it was before. This dialogue is irrelevant. It was important at one time, but it's just not anymore. We are in the middle of an excruciating and horrifying war. One in which we have had many, many American lives lost and coalition lives lost, but we have had hundreds of thousands of Iraqis who have died as a result of the violence in this country. What we need to do, I think, as American Muslims, and I'm just going to throw this little time bomb out there and then I'm going to sit down. What I think we need to do as American Muslims is learn a very valuable lesson from our Jewish brothers and sisters. 50 years ago in this country, Jewish Americans were a pariah. They were foreign, they were exotic, they were not a part of American society. They were seen much the same way that I think Muslim Americans are seen nowadays. And what our Jewish brothers and sisters did is that they coalesced, they unified, they reveled in their diversity, but they found unity in their diversity. And they made absolutely sure that their voice, that their values and their interests could not be ignored by their government. And as they multiplied and as they became fruitful and as they became a part of the very fabric of this country, that idea of Jews as being foreign or exotic or un-American has completely washed away. Now, the American Muslim community, according to most estimates, now outnumbers American Jews as the largest religious minority in the United States. We need to come together as our Jewish brothers and sisters did. And we need to recognize that our voices, our values, our interests can no longer be ignored, either in domestic affairs or in foreign policy affairs. And here is a thought. Here is a radical, radical thought. Why do we not make Iraq our Israel? Why do we not come together, put aside our various political agendas, our various ideas about whether the war was just or unjust, our different notions about what this overall so-called war on terror is about, or even this notion of the democratizing of the Middle East. Let's put that aside for a minute. Let's see what would happen if we come together and we agree on one thing and one thing only, and that is that it is impossible, it is absolutely impossible for the United States to win the war on terror without the help of Muslim Americans. And what that help means is that we have to recognize that there is good to be found in what is taking place in the conflicts in the Middle East and in Iraq. And that a stable, viable, democratic, indigenous democracy in Iraq, and Iraq for Iraqis, is good not just for all Muslims, but for all peoples of the world. And if we, just imagine, if we did that, if we said that we were going to make Iraq, despite the problems, despite the issues that are involved, the very thorny issues that are involved in this war, that we were going to make Iraq the shining light, the opportunity for American Muslims to come together and say, we are going to save this country. We are going to make sure that what comes out of here is good for everyone, and especially for Iraqis. Imagine the kind of power that we would have as Muslims in this country. We cannot allow our voices to be ignored, but there's only one way to do that, and that is to come together, to accept our diversity, to revel in our diversity, because that's what makes us Americans, is our diversity, but also to find unity in that diversity, to be one as God is one. Thank you.